Okay, so this is the Mission 2 project overview. So let's take a look at this project. We'll start with downloading the instructions right here. So if I download the instructions, you'll see there's an overview and some notes and then some instructions, and they're relatively detailed. But I think one of the best ways to kind of talk about this is to talk about what the idea of this expert system is. And the idea being is you're going to create an application that's going to query the user for some information, and then the application is going to take that information and perform a number of calculations that are going to generate some type of result, and then you're going to present that result to the user. Let me, before digging into kind of some of these suggestions, let me bop over to the demonstration application, and maybe that'll give you a better sense of what it is we're looking to accomplish with this project. So real simple, it's a loan consultant. This is going to calculate some information about a loan. So if I press any key, it says, what is your name? I'll say my name is Fred. Are you interested in a loan, Fred? Fred's going to change his mind, say no. It's going to give him a little bit of a salutation, say hasta la vista, and then off to the closing screen. Okay, so there is a way to bail out. I will, by default, kind of put those into my applications just because I think it's kind of nice. Sometimes people open up an application and realize that that is not necessarily what they want. This gives them a quick out. So all right, let's go back in and let's run this thing. So again, my name will be Fred, and yes, I do want a loan. It says, what's the name of your bank? We do banking with TBA. And then I have 4 types of loans, and the type of loan I choose is going to determine my interest rate. And so I'm going to go ahead and choose a home loan. And it says, tell me the amount of the loan. So let me see, I'm going to do 100,000. And tell me the number of years. I'm going to say 10. It says, it appears you have entered an invalid number for the years. Please enter a positive number. Okay, I typed 10. This is an example of validation. So what we've done here is we've gone in and validated it, because normally if we would have tried to take the letters T, E, N and turn that into a number, parse that into a number, the application would not have been able to do that. So what we want to do is we want to stop that right off the bat, say, hey, you know what, this is not a number, you need to give me a number. So let's go ahead and I'll correct that. I'll put 10 in. And now I've got some information. So I have a home loan, it's 3.5%. My principal is $100,000, my years are 10, and it's calculated that my monthly payments for 10 years are going to be $988 and some change. So if I push another button, the next thing that it does is it calculates what is commonly known as an amortization table. And you can see that it starts with month 0, which is a bug that I need to fix. Okay, I think it'll probably be fixed by the time you download it. But the way this works, if you've never used an amortization table, just so that you know, here's my loan, my current balance. I start with $100,000. My payment was $988.86. And then that payment is divided up, and some of it goes to interest and some of it goes to principal. So these two numbers add up to the payment. And then the principal is basically what I'm actually paying on the loan. This is the money that goes to the bank. This is what actually is getting paid on the loan. So the new balance is the current balance minus the principal. And so the new balance then on the next month comes over here, and I make the same payment. The thing that changes, though, is because I now have less of a balance, I'm paying less interest because the interest is on that balance, and that means I'm now paying more principal. So my principal basically, again, comes off of the current balance to the new balance. And so what you'll see over time, the way this works is that the interest, the amount of interest that I'm paying, because my principal is going down, my interest is going down, and the amount of principal then is going up. And so that goes all the way down, oops, until we get to the end here. All right. So that is the application to there. So it says thank you. We're at our closing screen. Okay, so let's jump back over into Moodle here. And you'll see that I've got some examples of other types of applications you could create. So, the cost of flooring 2 rooms. And again, these are just suggestions, and you're more than welcome to tweak them however you want. But you can see that I've given you some idea of the types of input that would be required to calculate the cost of flooring 2 rooms, cost of buying 2 items, future balance of a savings account. So that's kind of like my loan, only it's the other way around, and hopefully your principal is going to be going up. Time of person, these two are based on time date, and so time of person's been alive or time until retirement. And then of course there's the developer's choice, and so this is for you if you have an idea that it does not necessarily fit within one of the suggestion apps. Please shoot me a quick email and describe your idea, and I'll take a look at that and give you some suggestions. I want to make sure that it kind of falls within the range of, it's kind of like the Goldilocks range. I don't want an application that's too simple. I certainly don't want an application that is too difficult, unless I feel like you're a really strong coder and you want to push yourself and you have some time. So I want to be able to steer you into that Goldilocks zone. So you can take your time and look over this a little more closely. These are the elements that are going to be required, and then if you come down here, you're going to see here's our expert systems checklist. Again, you've got to print this out, indicate which of these skills that you believe you've nailed on this application. All right, so the next thing that I would like to do is to take a look at that code. So if you take a look at here, this is the link that you can download the example app, and this link right here is the link to the sample code. By the way, you're going to be required to turn in a video walkthrough, and this is a tutorial that kind of walks you through making a recording using screencast. You may also use YouTube if that's something you're comfortable with, or OBS and post it somewhere. So really what I'm looking for though is a video walkthrough of that. So if I download the example code here, it's actually going to jump to GitHub once again, and you can see that we've got the expert system. If you want to download this code in its totality and have be able to open it up in Visual Studio, you can. If you click over here, and you can download that as a zip file, extract it, and then open it up. Be sure to extract it, because if you forget to extract it, you'll actually be able to double click on it, go in, you'll see this .sln file. You can double click on that, it'll try and open up in Visual Studio, and you'll get an error message. So just remember, extract. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at our code. So there is our program.cs. This is our code file. And if I open that up, and we're just going to kind of walk through it. And as you can see, we have our usual using statements here. And remember that these are the pieces of code. Okay, fancy term is namespace, but these are basically the code that is being provided by Microsoft, and the compiler takes this code along with the code that we have created and puts that all together and generates a .exe file that works for us. That's executable. So here is the info block. Make sure that you turn in your info block and properly filled out, and otherwise I won't accept it. And so if we walk our way through here, there's a couple things. You can see that I've set up some screen configurations in this one. So we're dialing things up a little bit. And rather than having things explicitly spelled out in various parts of our application, what we're doing is we're kind of creating, and you can think of these like variables that for the most part are going to stay the same for our application. So they're not necessarily constants. I'll show that down here. But what this amounts to is that rather than having console color gray, console color dark red, you can see I have opening, closing screen background, opening, closing screen foreground. So these are going to set my foreground and background colors for the opening, closing screen. These are my application screen background and foreground colors. Okay, so rather than these explicitly, I have all of these. The advantage to this is that if we wanted to just all of a sudden change the theme for our entire application, we could just make the changes right here in this one space, and then all of the screens would change because they are all using these variables. This is an example here of constants. So we have variables, and variables are as they sound. They can vary, they can change. And so the variables represent, a lot of times I'll like to think of them as a drawer. It's a place where that drawer has a name. And as an example up here, I have a drawer called App Screen Foreground. And since C# is a strongly typed language, that drawer can only hold console colors in it. Okay? And when I open that drawer the very first time, I put console color, I put dark blue in there. So now anytime I want to go to that drawer, dark blue's hanging out in there. All right? Now I could very easily change that. I could open that drawer up again and put a different color in there. Okay? That's the idea of a variable. It replaces the new values, replace the old values. These constants are just as they sound. Once I set them up at the beginning of a program, or actually anywhere in the program, subsequently, after that, all of these values remain the same. One of the things you can notice is that if I take a look here, here's a variable declaration, so we give it the type and the variable name. We do the same thing with a constant. We have the type and the constant name. We put constant in front. That's abbreviation for constant. The other thing to note here is that the convention for naming constants uses all uppercase with an underscore between the words. Okay, so that's the convention. So here are our variables. And let me just scroll this up a little bit. So you can see in terms of my application, I have the username, the bank choice. You guys have gone through this. The type of loan. There's our generic user response. This allows us to get information from the user and then to kind of reuse that. So that's our drawer that holds a string called user response. We'll put stuff in and take things out periodically. I have some number type. So I have two doubles, i.e. these guys have decimals, loan principal and monthly interest rate. And then I have integer values, which loan term in years and loan term in months. And then I also have a double, which is a monthly payment. These guys right here, you can see I have to set these equal to 0 because of how the pre-compiler, how Visual Studio, as I'm coding it out, sometimes Visual Studio, if you don't give it a starting value, a default value, the pre-compiler, Visual Studio with its squiggly, its angry red lines will not let you kind of move forward. And so the easiest way around that is just to kind of set these values. Of course, if you've gone in and read, you know that, interestingly enough, all numeric variables have a default value. Automatically, C# does that, and that default value is 0. But this is for the pre-compiler check, okay? And then here is the Boolean value. It's called valid response. We'll use this when we validate. All right, so you can see that I have an opening screen, and you'll see that the first thing I do every time I move to a new screen is I decide what I'm going to do with my cursor. In this case, the opening screen, I don't want a flashing cursor. I'm going to set my background and foreground colors, and those are the variables that we set up top. I'm going to use my console clear to reset that screen, and now all of these values, or I should say all of these properties, are going to take effect. And so there's my initial user, there's my opening screen, here's my initial user screen. You'll see that again I set those values. Okay, so this is my new screen. Now I want my cursor visible. I'm using different background and foreground colors. I clear to reset that, and you've seen all of this code before. Okay, so I greet the user, I get the user's name. I echo back the user. Okay. I've included other methods in here for you if you want to, just as a quick reminder. There are 3 ways to integrate a variable inside of a string. Okay, and so this is the concatenation method. This is kind of the standard method that you're going to see a lot in Stack Overload and when you bop around the internet. This is also a really common method used in other languages, whereby this squiggly 0 squiggly, what we do is we substitute the first thing in, and then if we had more than one, we would have squiggly 0 0 squiggly 0 squiggly, and then squiggly 1 squiggly, and we'd have a comma and maybe something over here like age or something like that. And then this is the interpolation, which you're going to see me use more times than not. And the reason being is because as long as I remember this $ here, I can plug the variable name right where it should be. And this is obviously, this makes it much easier to read than these other 2. Okay. So first off, we're going to determine if the user's looking for a loan. So this is that big overriding conditional. So you'll see here, it asks if the user has replied with a yes, and this one is not quite validated yet. And you could, if you wanted to kind of deal with one issue, and that would be you could put a dot too lower here so that it would take what the console got from the user, and if they have, for some reason, if they typed a capital Y, it would make it all lowercase, and then this comparison would work. Or you could make this 2 upper and make all of these uppercase. So there's one form of validation. I chose not to validate this answer, and so basically what it amounts to is that if they gave me a lowercase yes, then we were going to proceed with it. If they gave me anything else, they said maybe or whatever, it's not going to go into this conditional block. And if I scroll down, you'll see that's a big conditional block. Okay, and if I get down here, this is the else for that if up there, and it says user not interested in the loan. And this is where we put in, a little kind of a nice little statement inviting them back if they ever were interested in it. And then we move to the closing screen. So there's kind of this big conditional with this else and all of this if. Now, both of those, the if and the else, fall out into the closing screen. All right, so let's go back all the way up to the beginning of our if block. Okay, so here we are. Here's our if block and user information screen. I don't need to set the colors because the colors are already application colors, and so I don't need to change those. And you can see right here, I've provided some information. Here's where we get the user bank information. The bank choice is nothing more than a string, and so you'll see here's an example of where we have squiggly 0 squiggly and squiggly 1 squiggly, and username goes to the 0, the bank choice goes to 1. Remember that programmers are a little bit strange. We start counting with 0. All right, so now we're going to go in here and get the type of loan. Okay, so this is validation, and you can see that we are using a do, and if I scroll down here, while. And so what we're going to do is we're going to stay in this do while loop as long as valid response is equal to false, because this is the not false means true. So as long as it's not false, then we're going to keep going around. So as long as we don't have a valid response, we're going to stay in this thing. So how does it work? Well, we're going to, again, create a new screen. We initialize, I should say up here, we initialize our valid response to true. So we're going to start assuming that the user is going to give us what we need. And then what we're going to do is we're going to get the type of loan from the user. And I didn't demonstrate this, but we're going to get the type of loan from the user. I've prompted them for the loan. I get that as a string, And you can see here I've made this all lowercase, and I have type of loan, so that's my variable, that's my drawer called type of, or name type of loan, and we're going to put the user's response, we're going to turn it all to lowercase first. And then we have this conditional. And the conditional says that if it's not equal to home, and it's not equal to vehicle, and it's not equal to college, and it's not equal to personal. Okay, so basically what that amounts to is if it's not equal to any of these, then we say we have an invalid response, and it appears you entered, we give the user a little bit of a feedback, it appears you entered an invalid loan type, please re-enter your loan type. Okay, and we have a pause here so that they can actually see this. And then what happens is we come down here, and since valid response is false, not false is true, which sends us all the way back up to here, and we reset the screen, we give them a new prompt, they give us an answer, and we retest that to see if that works. Okay. Now, once we have a valid response, it's time to get the principal of the loan. So we need to do the same thing. We're going to validate that. We're going to reuse valid response. We're going to, again, use a do while. And we're going to assume that they give us what we want. We're going to get a number from them. Okay, but that's actually really going to be text. And then what we're going to do is we're going to use the try parse. So the parse guys, if you remember, the parse team, if it doesn't get something it wants, it just crashes the program. The try parse team, they're great. I like these guys. They do two things. The first thing that they do is they take a look at what it is that we're going to give them to see if indeed there is, in this case, a double in there. Okay. So is there a double in the user's response? So i.e., is there a number, a decimally number inside the user response? And then what ends up happening is this whole chunk right here ends up being true or false. Okay, so the first thing they do is take a look at what we want them to, the string, and they're going to say true or false. Yep, there's a number in there. No, there isn't. Okay. If there isn't a number, it just returns false, in which case we're going to go in here because not false is true. So in which case we didn't get a number from the user, so we're going to come in here, give them a little bit of a love note, some feedback, and then circle back around. If there was a number in there, then this thing is going to be true, and so not true is false, and so we don't do this block. But then the other thing that the try parse guys do, which is really, really useful, is that once they take a look into the user response and they do find a number, they basically kick that number out and stick it into our loan principal variable. So this whole statement here does just a whole bunch of work for us. Okay? So it checks to see if indeed we got what we wanted from the user. And if we did get what we wanted from the user, it actually puts that value into our loan principal. So that's really handy. But if it doesn't get that, then we give them a little bit of feedback. We pause so they can see that feedback. And then what happens is, since valid response is false, again, not false is true. And so we circle back up, we reset, assuming they're going to give us what we want, and we go through that process all over again. Okay? Now we get the length of the loan. Okay? And you'll see that this is exactly the same. The structure's all the same. The only real difference here is that since the loan term years is an integer variable, we're having an int try parse, and up here we are having, did I go past it? Where am I here? Oh, right here. We're going to have a double try parse. Okay, so those are the two types of validations. We got three actually going through this. All right. Now what we need to do is we need to assign the interest rate, because we know the type of loan. Here's our switch statement. Okay, And switches, if you remember, are really, really similar to if, else if, else if, else if, i.e. these guys are all mutually exclusive. So in a switch block, just like an else if block, only one of these case statements can be executed. And if none of these 4 case statements are executed, there's a default down here. But interestingly enough, we were validating, so we're pretty sure, with our code anyways, that we're going to have one of these 4 types of loans. Okay, so here you have the monthly interest rate, and that monthly interest rate is going to be the interest rate, that's a constant that we set up top, and I'm going to divide by 12 the number of months. And so that sets, this switch statement sets my monthly interest rate dependent upon the type of loan that the user wanted. And then this is just something here that we put in. So if the monthly interest rate is not equal to 0, okay, so i.e. we didn't have this default, what we do is we actually calculate out, this is an equation that helps us calculate out the monthly rate. Okay, so I'm not going to go into that. You can kind of take a look at that. That's a formula that you can easily find out on the internet. You see, I will point out though that this POW actually stands for power, and so that is this monthly interest rate plus 1 raised to the loan terms in months. So, like I said, I don't want to spend a lot of time on that. You're more than welcome to go out, take a peek at that, and see how that works. All right, so the monthly payments are right here. So this is a new screen. You can see we've reset, again, the cursor, the clear. This is my header, okay? And then I'm just providing some information. So, here's the username. I'm using my interpolation. And you can see that this is where I put all that information in. Now here's something to pay attention to. So the type is a string, and that works just fine. The rate, what I did is I took the monthly interest rate and I multiplied it by 12. And then I did some quick formatting. So the :P means to format that as a percentage. The principal now is a double, so that's a numbery thing. And the :C means to format that as currency. Term in years, this is an integer, so the right line works just fine with that integer. Monthly payment here, you can see again, I displayed that. That's a double. I displayed that as currency. And so currency does 2 things. One is it sets the decimal places to 2, because otherwise you just see, I'm not exactly sure if it's 10 or 12 decimal places, which looks a little funny. And the other thing that it does is it puts a $sign in the front, so that's pretty handy. Okay, so now let's take a look at the amortization table. So let's say that you wanted to actually create a table. So how do we create a table? Again, I clear my screen, and if we come down here and we take a look, you'll see this is my table headers. So if you remember that table across the top, it had headers for each of those columns. And so here's my month, my current balance, my payment, my interest, my principal, the new balance, and new balance. And you'll see that I am using a format statement that says pad left. And so what this does is it basically creates a column width of 5. And so in this case, it's exactly the length. And this one creates a column width of 20 and 10 and 10 and 20. All right. And what it does is it puts this on the right-hand side of that column, and then it pads the left side with spaces. So pad left is like right justifying your text in a column. Okay. And then what I do is I kind of created some math here whereby I kind of, as I walked you through that, I should say I created some variables so I could kind of do the math of the amortization table. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about this, but you can see that I have my current balance, my new balance. Those are variables that didn't exist as a part of the rest of the program. Monthly principal and monthly interest, again, are two variables that didn't exist for the rest of the program. And here, it looks like I've already fixed the month. The month is actually starting with 1 in this code. You saw before in the example I gave you it was 0, so I just haven't snagged the updated exe file. So basically this is my for loop, so this is the other loop, and you can see that my for loop is going to be an integer, and it's going to have a variable called month. That month variable is going to start at 0, and it's going to continue until it's less than or equal to, as long as it's less than or equal to the loan term in months. Okay, and so this right here is an increment of by 1, so it's going to go 1, 2, 3. You can always, if you need in a for loop, you can always change this increment. You can increment by 1. You can decrement by 1 by putting a couple negative signs in here. You can also change this expression and increment and decrement by any other value that you want. Okay? And so this is what I was showing you, that the monthly interest is equal to the current balance times the monthly interest rate. The monthly principal is equal to the monthly principal, the monthly payment minus the monthly interest. So this is kind of what I shared with you as we looked at that table. And then the new balance is equal to the current balance minus the monthly principal. So these are the values that go in that console, or go in those columns. And again, you can see that I did the same thing here. So here's the month, and notice that my padding, these padding numbers are exactly the same as these padding numbers. Okay, and that's what gives it that table look, and they all line up. Now the other thing to notice is that I took these values right here, and remember that these are numbers, and even though the right line will let you print out numbers directly without changing them to a string, these pad lefts do not work unless you actually have a string. So what I did is I said, hey, okay, take the month, that's an integer. I want you to turn it into a string, and after you turn it into a string, then I want you to pad it left. And I did the same thing with all these other values. So here's monthly interest, turn it into a string. I've given it a format too. So you can see that I've given it a currency format with 2 decimal places. So this is how the C makes it a currency. The 2 makes basically denotes the number of decimal places if you wanted to. If it made sense, you could certainly leave that 2 off, or put a 0. I guess I have to toy with that. I'm not exactly sure which. And then you could have no decimal places. It would round off to the nearest dollar amount. Okay. The other thing I wanted to point out is, I've talked about how I don't often use the pluses when I do my right line or when I kind of create a string. This term is called concatenation. This is a perfect example of a place where myself and a lot of developers will do that. And the reason being is you can see that this is a whole lot more legible. It's easier to read than if I just ran it all the way out here. Okay? It also makes it much easier to compare. So if for some reason my columns weren't lining up, it's pretty easy to see that I have 5, 20, 10, 10, 10, 20, 5, 20, 10, 10, 10, 20. If they were stretched out on a really long line, it would be really, really tough to compare. And that goes to reinforcing that as a developer, you're writing code not only to get the right answer. In a lot of ways, it's almost more important that you, as a developer, write code that can be read, and as a developer, can read code. So those kind of go hand in hand. So, take your time and make your code look good. I always use the example, if you're writing a report in an English class or something like that, you're writing a paper in an English class, you're pretty careful about where you put your indents and your spaces, how many lines you have between paragraphs. You're not willy-nilly about that. I think you learned that a long time ago. So writing code is exactly the same way. Okay, and then here we're now down to kind of our outer if-else and our closing screen. All right, so that is the walkthrough for the project, the code. And if you have any questions, as always, please get with me. Have a good day.